Hey folks, Steve here with another End of Empire video. We are looking at turn 1 in the American Revolutionary War scenario. This video should comprise of the 1775 year, and we'll try to stick to a video per year as we go. We may modify that over time. And I've already done some of the reinforcement stuff just to get us ready to rock and roll. There was one uh, reinforcement this turn, which was for the British. It's one British regular regiment. I have decided to put that into Gage's stack here in Boston, the main British Army. Just figuring to make that hex even more unassailable from the Americans, make it that much harder to get decent odds if the Americans try to attack the British in Boston. In terms of the Native American ally recruitment step, the British have several agents that they could have deployed. They only successfully placed an agent all the way down in Pensacola. Uh, and so, that's one agent, which means the British have the potential to recruit some Native Americans in the southern map on future turns right now, but everything else is slow. The Americans did not succeed in getting their agent into Albany. So kind of a slow start. And we still have what is functionally our first turn here. So this is spring of 1775. The situation is kind of thus right now. We have Provost in the south here in Florida. He may aim to walk up to Savannah if he can, though if he does, there'll likely be some American militia to try to stand in his way, at least on turn 1. There's just not much there. And then otherwise, in all the important action near Boston, we have some forces up here in Canada that is off camera a little bit. Probably don't expect to see much go on there other than maybe Carleton tries to take a couple of units from Quebec into Montreal, just to kind of hold there. I'm not sure what they want to do. Otherwise, the Americans have a regiment here. They have some Marines here, interestingly enough. I'm not sure what I want to do with them. And then we have Gage's big stack here in Boston itself. Now, I've done some sheet note-taking to kind of help me know what's going on as things change, just so I don't have to count counters every 3 seconds. In the stack right now with the reinforcements, the British stack have 41 factors on defense. They have 40 factors on attack. One of the British units has a boxed combat factor, which means it's halved on attack, but it ultimately just means they lose 1 combat factor on the attack. So a potent force, pretty potent force. Now, Thomas's stack here has right now 40 defense and 20 attack. He has basically 10 4-combat strength regiments that are halved on attack. So altogether 40 on defense, 20 on attack. And then in Ward's stack, which I've labeled the main army, he has 28 on the attack, 56 on the defense, as he has 14 units that are similar for combat strength but halved on the attack. But I have also called out the Massachusetts militia into Ward's stack as part of reinforcements. So rather than have those Massachusetts militia show up as an interception, they're instead going to bolster the Americans for a potential attack on Boston. That adds 25 factors on defense, which means on defense, Ward's stack is actually, for as long as the militia stick around for, are actually at 81 defense, and then on attack, that's basically 40. Or I guess maybe that's 41. I guess if you round up, I guess we'd round up. So 41, which actually gives us 1-to-1 odds on the British here, and is the best that we can possibly hope for. If we were to team up with the Thomas stack, that would actually not give us enough to get 2-to-1 odds. So, I mean, altogether, If it was 41 plus 20, that'd only be 61. That's not enough to actually change the ratio. So at least on one attack, without the Americans trying to combine stacks, they can get a 1-to-1 attack off. And again, I'm like, okay, am I calculating that right? 70, 81 divided in half, and then you round up would be 41. Yeah, okay. So it would be 1-to-1. But here's the thing. 1-to-1 odds by itself is not bad by any means. All the leaders here have 0 tactical abilities, so it would just be maybe a 1-to-1 die roll. However, we are dealing with a number of penalties as the Americans that will hurt us a great deal. One is all these stacks of Americans lack actual organic artillery. They do not have artillery on their the unit counters, which means they just don't have any regular artillery. If you're fighting against a enemy army in a civilized hex, it's civilized, civilized being these cultivated hexes that you see here in yellow or orange, you suffer a penalty to your die roll as the attacker if your opponent has artillery, and certainly the British do. They do have artillery. We can see all their units here. That little dot in the middle of the symbol denotes the presence of artillery, organic artillery, as part of the stack or part of the unit regiment. So we'd have a -1 of the die roll for that. Then we also have to take into account this marker here, which is the Boston powder shortage, which provides a further -1 until turn 7, or basically through the end of turn 6. That's why there's a little 6 in the upper right of the counter to show that that is withdrawn. And I'm putting it here near Boston just to make sure we don't forget that there's a -1 for that. And then we also have the lack of von Steuben's reforms, which is a -1. And on top of that, given that the British Army is within the fortifications of Boston, that incurs another -1 penalty to the die roll. So what does that mean altogether? That the Americans, if they attempt to attack the British in Boston, will receive, that's right, a -4 to their die roll, which is not great, my dudes, is not great at all. In fact, it's very, very bad. And you can imagine if I rolled a 6, right, this game system uses d6s, the maximum result I could get on that 1-to-1 combat would be a 6. -4 is a 2, which in this system is a 1-step loss to the attacker. No, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Is a 1-step loss to the attacker, 1 to the defender, and the attacker must retreat. Which means you betcha the Americans are gonna attack. So you might ask, why would that be? Well, to put it simply, if they can roll well enough to cause a step loss to the British, all the units that are in Boston right now are regulars. Every step inflicted to the British regulars in this game are going to bring us closer to victory. We need to eliminate units, which will be very hard to do in this circumstance, but the more that we tatter the British regulars, the better off we are. So despite all these negatives, these feudal attacks can give us an advantage over time. We have to wear the British out. We need to make it hard for them to deal with this. The other thing to keep in mind is, for the Americans, whatever step losses we take, let's just say we rolled poorly. A 1-to-1 die roll, the worst result you can get is a 3-step losses to the attacker, and you have to retreat. So in that case, you just go back to the hex you came from. If you want to attack again, you got to roll to activate again. Thomas and Ward are not particularly good leaders, but they'll activate half the time on non-winter turns. 3-step losses will surely reduce the combat factors that are in their stack, right? It'll make it harder to attack over time because they're never going to get 1-to-1 odds again, or it'll be very hard to. But we don't care if they take step losses. We really don't, because we will eventually get those step losses back. And many of these units that are in Thomas's and Ward's hexes will be replaced anyway after turn 5. They're going to get different units. The American troops will pretty regularly get to replenish their units and get step losses recovered. So while in many cases throughout the early parts of the war, and really for much of the game, the American armies will be really disadvantaged against the British. Their ultimate ability here is the ability to come back. They will be able to replenish, assuming they can defend their territory. And basically, the British are going to be, trying to punch a, I don't know what the good metaphor is here, punching a sponge. I don't know. They can punch the Americans down, but they'll keep getting back up again unless the British can very critically seize their supply hexes, of which there are several here. So early strategy for 1775 as the Americans is just to basically try to wear out the British where they can, prepare for some possibly an invasion of Canada, would probably behoove the Americans to some degree after the turn 2 reinforcements come onto the board. Excuse me. And the British, meanwhile, really just want to try to maintain some level of safety. And then they also need to be thinking about where to make progress in the South. And really, I think the concept of a Southern strategy makes a lot of sense because for much of the territory on the board, the supply hexes, many of them are along the coast. So, for instance, the only supply hex in Georgia is Savannah. So, if the British get there, then they knock Georgia out of the war. Moving up to South Carolina, they would need to take Charleston, which might not be too difficult. They probably also want to garrison 96, but that's a whole thing. North Carolina, I got to worry about Wilmington and Salisbury, so they do have to get something moved up there. Might not be too bad. And then we start talking about Virginia. We have Suffolk, we have Yorktown, we have Winchester, we have Alexandria. So there's several more that would need to be taken. Maryland has both Baltimore and this hex here that doesn't have a named town on it. Delaware has this hex. Pennsylvania has both Carlisle and Philadelphia. New Jersey has Trenton, Elizabethtown. New York has White Plains, this hex here, and Albany. And then you can kind of see the rest. They're all scattered about. And so the British will need to be thinking in terms of strategy, how do they get into those places, shut those hexes down, basically keep American units from coming back, and even really taking control of these entry hexes, these little hexes with the guys on them. That means that there is some unit that comes onto the board there, and if you can hold it, you may be able to keep those American units from coming onto the board. So there is a asymmetry aspect to this game where, in this scenario in particular, where the Americans can basically always come back unless their infrastructure is fully occupied in certain regions, and then they have trouble coming back. So the British need to use their somewhat finite resources to shut the Americans down. The Americans, meanwhile, want to stay out and about and whittle the British down enough that they can get support from the French, and then just survive in many ways. Do as much damage as they can to the British and survive. If they can do that, they may be the victors. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the, because I don't want this video to be super duper long, I'm going to go ahead and take myself off camera, and I'm going to run through the first turn. And when I come back, I'll talk about what occurred on the first turn, the results of combats, and we'll get ready for the second turn playthrough with all, and I'll also have all the turn 2 reinforcements added to the board so you guys can see just how much more quickly the board fills up with units. Okay, here we are on turn 2, or the beginning of turn 2, beginning of the operations phase, 1775. The last turn was kind of anticlimactic. Both American leaders failed to activate and could not assault Boston. So kind of a bummer a little bit there. And what we have tried to do now is, I tried to activate Prevost. That didn't work. And so we did activate Carleton, who has gathered up some units and came in to this area with the native unit just to kind of have something of a bulwark in the north. But now we've reached turn 2, and with that, a couple of things have occurred for reinforcements. One is the British now have an agent in Detroit to activate or to recruit additional native allies. And in the deep south, the Choctaw have joined the British cause, and that their unit has been recruited in their village way down in the south. Not much is going on in the south right now, mind you, but they were able to do that, so good for them. What you see now is the influx of American units, the American reinforcements for turn 2, and they're kind of strewn about all over the place. So we got Bedell out here, or I'm not sure how you want to pronounce that, Bedell, shows up out here. He's kind of a frontiers unit. He's got some ambush attack capability, so we could come up here to harass, go up north to harass the British near Montreal, but he doesn't have a good, he doesn't have a special leader or anything. We do have a number of regiments that have been recruited along through here. We have even a couple of units that just joined up with Ward automatically, including, I should say, a dedicated, let's see if we can get the focus there, a dedicated, come on, there it is, a dedicated artillery unit. So we at last have some artillery capability that gives us a little bit more oomph in trying to make an attack. Here he shows up just in the same hex as Ward and the rest of the crew right there. Now that's a special unit that has some special withdraw stuff. And if I go look at that, just because we want to be thinking ahead, let's see, where is it? That is considered the Gridley artillery unit. If we can get the Gridley artillery unit and the Knox unit, which is not in the game yet, I think it's coming up in a few turns, if they can occupy the same hex during the phase, you can replace them with the 3rd Continental Artillery Regiment. So something we want to keep in mind for that unit. Anyway, we also got a different artillery unit down here in New York, amusingly enough, in hex 2220. We'll want to get him moved out of there. And so you can see, I mean, there's a whole bunch of guys here. Some of them are actually pretty potent. We also got, who's this? Putnam in a hex with a 4-step regiment, which is interesting. So we've got a whole bunch of power that's just shown up, mobilizing the northern states to assist in the siege of Boston. And importantly, in Philadelphia, we have Washington, Lee, and Schuyler. Now, because Washington has such a great activation rating, he can do a couple of things. He can say, hey, I'm going to send some of these subordinate leaders off to do other stuff. I'm going to, or, whatever, I'll take everybody and I'm going to sweep through here. I'm going to pick up all these guys with a decent chance that he can keep moving, pick up a bunch of guys, grab them, and try to assault Boston while Gage is still there. That's well within Washington's ability to do, given it's unlikely he will stop activation once he gets rolling. Once he succeeds, just keep in mind that the leader gets a basically +1 to his initiative rating after activating. So he can pretty much do whatever he wants because he's got a 5 campaign rating, +1 is 6. Washington can go anywhere and anywhere he wants with his 20 movement points. So it's going to be important to try to get him to gather up these guys, pick a place to focus, or he's going to pick up these guys and maybe head to New York and make it so that New York is not an easy grab for the British, because the British really want to grab New York. It's important for them. Also important to show, we do get, this is the Maryland Virginia Rifles, and so they're a more ambush-oriented unit. They came into Winchester in Virginia. So some early grabs there. Now, the British, by comparison, just to show, we still don't have the fleet in full force, but they had a number of reinforcements, and what I chose to do, we've got Howe, we've got Clinton, we've got a whole bunch of regulars. Here's a cavalry unit. We talked about the need for cavalry to be able to do evasions properly, or to not suffer a penalty when doing reaction movement. So this is a potent force, and I have them in Halifax. So it might have been cool if I got Provost off his ass to start marching towards Savannah or something and put him down there. And what I opted to do, actually, you know what? Maybe I should think through this for a second. Maybe I should send Clinton and some additional units down south and just start the southern campaign early. I couldn't do a naval invasion, or I'm not going to be able to do a naval invasion of New York yet because we need the fleet to actually be present for that. But I think if we kept Gage holed up in Boston, that might prove okay. And if we just get some force down there in the south, someone a little bit better than Provost, we could start a pretty decent campaign in the south to start shutting some stuff down early. And I like the idea of that. So I think I'm gonna change up the British reinforcement setup, and I think what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna send Clinton and let's see, we want a couple regiments, and we want some regiments that will be able to handle some regiments that can handle a wilderness combat if they get stuck in one. And we're going to send Clinton with these guys down to St. Augustine, actually. So just to show this guy, and Clinton are going to go down to St. Augustine so that we can make some progress down here. I don't think there's anything keeping me from doing that. It's just the reinforcements have to go to a friendly port. St. Augustine is a friendly port, so is Halifax. So Howe is in Halifax with some reinforcements. Clinton has a contingent in the south to make progress in the south. And then the rest of the action still centers on Boston principally. So I'll go off camera and we'll run through the first summer turn of 1775 and see what happens. Okay, here we are at the beginning of turn 3, the operations phase, and a few things on reinforcements. So more and more units begin to show up on the board, so much so that it is actually difficult to get things organized to where, like, I'm adding units to the main army over here, and it is actually getting difficult to properly calculate the strengths of the stack that I am having to run through and like calculate, write it down on a sheet of paper, and that's a little annoying. It's not so bad for the British because this is remaining relatively stable, but it is just gnarly on the American side where we just have a lot of little units that we have to count up. So that's a little wonky. Right now, Washington spent the previous turn just getting a bunch of guys ready with Ward's stack. They did not conduct an attack themselves, though we did use the activation rules to get Ward to attack with a subset of the full stack. But ultimately, all that really did was hurt the Americans. We did do one step loss to the British, but it was situated such that the British haven't lost a whole unit yet. So kind of repeated attempts to get in have failed. We did use the Badal unit who activated to come up here to threaten Carleton. So we basically set it up that this stack can't just go down Lake Champlain without this guy waltzing in behind him. So we're kind of going to force the issue with the British to try to chase that unit down. Elsewhere, we have a few onesie-twosie units that continue to just kind of exist and haven't been gathered up by leaders yet, but we now have some reinforcing leaders like Montgomery, who should be able to gather some guys up and maybe start heading north for a campaign towards Montreal, potentially. I've tried to make sure that with Lee and Putnam, we have a decent stack of units in New York. that is there to have something that if the British decide to attack New York, they're going to run into something that's going to give them grief. Same thing with Philadelphia. We left Schuler down here with the Pennsylvania militia just to make sure that nothing is too easy if someone tries to, come in here and wreak some havoc. We do have some more units starting to show up in the south. And what's interesting is what I had done with our auto activation rifles is they went all the way down south to this spot here, and they are there to basically beat up on Clinton if he tries to march through the wilderness hex right here. Both Prevost and Clinton were failing to activate, which gave them the initiative to run down here. We are also now starting to see some South Carolina regiments being raised, some Rangers up here. These Rangers are potently powerful. They're just missing a leader. I mean, look at that, +5, more remarkable. Where did he come? Right there. And then, interestingly, we have done more. Now, what I've done is I've had the militia pop in here, and so the Virginia militia. So these guys are going to have to fight the militia. This is This is basically Lord Dunmore, and some stuff went on down here. So there's going to be a required fight. They have boxed entries, which means they are not denied entry to the game map, but they will fight it out here in Norfolk against the Virginia militia. And then, like I said, we've got some more stuff starting to appear. The Choctaw in the South haven't been able to activate. The Americans did get their Albany agent, which was kind of a good die roll for them. And everything else is kind of going slow from there. And we did get the Detroit agent as well. He's way up there. So kind of a slow roll. I did make one correction. So I realized it was a major mistake to not put Howe in Boston, and so I have put Howe in Boston. I originally had him in Halifax, and I just gave him a free redeploy over to Boston. Or maybe we could do that anyway. I'd have to look at the later redeployment rules, but I saw no reason not to, and I basically exchanged him for Percy in Halifax now. So there are reinforcements in Halifax. There are reinforcements in the South. And then we're going to decide to do something with this Boston stack. At this point, the Boston stack has a defense of 57, 53 on attack. Washington's big stack here, not counting Thomas's, which has stayed the same, 20 attack and 40 defense. If I counted right, and I'm a little worried that I might have miscounted something, but Washington should have 65 attack, 119 defense. That's some units having on the attack, some units are not halved on the attack. And so 65 to 57 is 1-to-1 odds. So Washington is going to be able to try to get into Boston and wreak some havoc, maybe force the British to retreat. The one significant thing will be that in terms of the leader calculation right now for combat, I'm try to find the rule. So Howe has a tactical bonus. Washington has a tactical bonus. However, I do not believe, let's see, only the ranking leader. So technically, Gage is still the ranking leader, at least until the end of turn 4. And so he's withdrawn at the end of turn 4. So at the end of turn 4, the leading ranking leader in Boston will be Howe, who has a bonus, but Gage is still a commander. So the Americans with Washington here are going to be able to attack Boston at 1-to-1 odds. They will have a -1 due to the Boston shortage. They will have a -1 due to the reforms. They will have a -1 to the fortification. But they won't suffer the extra artillery bonus or penalty because they have artillery. And Washington's bonus means that it's just going to be a net -2 to the die roll instead of 3. So 1-to-1 -2. We could get lucky and get a 4 result if we roll a 6, which is a 1-step loss to the British. So things are starting to get dicier for the British, and They need some way to get out of here, but we're only allowed to use the fleet of the British on this turn if the British need to retreat. So it's definitely a question like, yeah, maybe I should have just put all these Halifax reinforcements into Boston. I probably should have just done that. I mean, I guess there's no reason not to have, because that would have boosted their defense by, say, they'd be up to 60, 65, 67, 72, 77 or more, which would definitely make up a deficit. So I don't know. I maybe I screwed that up. Maybe I did just screw that up, and I should have done something different and not sent those guys to Halifax. So if there's going to be an error made in the early game, it's I probably should have just stuck everything in Boston. No reason not to try to do that. Um, because if these guys retreat, I'm going to send them to Halifax anyway, and then they're going to invade New York probably. Probably. Alternatively, I could have sent these guys to Quebec and then maybe had a bigger stack that was going to start coming down, down this way, I guess. But I don't know. The one thing will be once Gage leaves, Carleton is higher rank than Howe, who is a 5 seniority. Let's see that. A 5 seniority. Carleton is a 4. So once Gage leaves, it basically means Carleton can't come down into the civilized hexes due to that commander-in-chief rule. So any opportunity for Carleton to get down there and cause a bunch of mischief, he's going to have to give that up to other British generals who are not as active as Carleton is. So that's sort of one of the things where the political rules start to mess with the British a little bit, and they're going to have some issues. So anyway, we're going to see what happens next in the next summer turn 3, and we'll come back in, I guess that would be the fall, the fall of 1775. Okay, here we are at the start of the fall turn 4, with everything kind of in line. We got some more overseas reinforcements. Well, some overseas, some hex base. So down in St. Augustine, the French stack with Clinton and Prevost got a couple more units. That will help for a southern campaign, certainly. They were too scared of the Maryland Virginia rifles that are in the forest hex protecting Georgia than to try to make an immediate trek. It just looked too dangerous. 1-to-1 odds could have easily ripped apart some British. So we figured caution. We've got plenty of time to work with as the British. But in the meanwhile, just to kind of show that, they're down there. But more units continue to appear in the south as the regiments start to come up. There was a Carleton fight here. Or not Carleton, what am I saying? Dunmore. Dunmore versus the militia that are in Virginia, and it was a 1-to-3 column die roll for the British and Dunmore, and they just ended up destroying themselves, though the militia, I believe, scattered for that. I'm trying to recall now what. Yeah, it was something. It was like a 2 AR1 or something. So the Virginia militia got dispersed, but both the Dunmore units were destroyed. But now we're starting to see some additional trained regiments start to show up. We have defenses in Philadelphia that are in place. We've got Lee defending New York with some units. And in our sort of main theater here, Washington made several attacks against the British. Not all of them went well. He did, in a couple of results, he had a retreat, which forced him to use more movement points to conduct more attacks. He did attrit the British a little bit, but so far the British were able to take steps off a few units and have not had to eliminate a British unit yet. And as of the turn 4 reinforcements, they put in another unit. So right now there are 2 British units that have 2 steps. If they start to lose any more, they'll start to attrit away. So I'll definitely say my big mistake so far is having these reinforcements go anywhere but Boston. They should have just went in. And I almost want to fix my error, but I don't know. I guess I'm going to have more flexibility with a split stack right now, and maybe that's good enough. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's tough to say. It's tough to say. Okay. And the other thing is like uh, when does Gage decide to retreat out of here? Well, this is the last turn with Gage as the leader, so he's gonna withdraw at the end of this turn, and Howe will be the commander, which is gonna make it tougher for Washington to make any ground here. So it's this continual conversation like when do we um, pull out of Boston? Do we do it historically? Was doing it during the historical time frame the most suitable time? I'm not entirely sure, what's going to make the most sense to do. I'm just looking through some of these units because we're going to be doing some withdrawals very soon, and I need to get a good look at the board and where some of those guys are going to be at. We're going to lose Thomas as a leader in a couple of turns, and a few other important things. We've got Arnold, I should say. So we have Arnold here as an activating leader. And he activates all the time, so we might as well send him up to do some shenanigans somewhere up here or otherwise to cause some havoc. Though Carleton, has some protection. Makes sense to try something. Might as well do something while we can. Yeah. So still, this whole Boston situation is just still tricky. We're not able to get as far as we want, but we'll see what happens here in the fall of 1775. Okay, here we are at basically the beginning of turn 5, and this would be the last turn in 1775. So it is a winter turn, which means we should not expect much to get activated. And basically, I made some corrections. I realized it was foolish to send some units up where I had sent them because it just didn't make sense. So I fixed a couple of mistakes on the American side, kind of like what I did fixing Howe for the British. I'm allowing myself to fix a few just silly mistakes I didn't realize I was making. We did get Ward marching up the Lake Champlain area, and if we're lucky, we'll do some kind of winter offensive. But he doesn't have much to work with, honestly. We have missed out on a Canadian reinforcement because we don't have control of the hex up there. Or at least I don't think we do. I need to think through that for a second. Let me find the unit. Maybe I'm wrong. It could be that I'm wrong. This says 3511, and there's nobody in there. So can I put that unit? Do I need to have a guy there? I guess is what I'm not sure about. There's nobody in the way, so it seems like I could, and so I am, I guess. I guess what I should have done is I should have parked somebody there, but I did not do that. Carleton is in Quebec right now and is trying to grab a unit. So this could actually be kind of interesting to see. Can the Americans get up into Canada and make a difference? I'm not really sure. We do have this Knox unit that does nothing until it can be combined with the Gridley artillery. So that's something we're going to want to try to do when we can, sometime over the next couple of turns. Washington continues to try to assault Boston, and we are almost down to the nubs on the British end, but they just got more naval reinforcements, which they did put into Boston, and so they can continue to trit a couple units, and they'll eventually, I think this is going to be one of the last turns we're going to see the British trying to hold on to Boston. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to hold on to it for too much longer. I have to go look at when they vacated. I think they might have vacated in August 75. I have to go look. So we just continue to see, the Americans start to get set up. More native units are starting to come onto the board and are trying to make it, but they're just not activating very much. That's kind of slowing them down. just in general seeing, things start to come together, but the battle lines are still being drawn. And to be honest, we're going to see a whole lot more units come on into the next year. The one thing, yeah, we're going to have some withdrawals here very soon. And I will say that in some of the combats that Washington was attempting, and he was starting to ding the British a little bit, we've ended up with a couple of units uh, that are basically that were basically defeated and removed from the board. And let's see, what did I do with those guys? Oh, I know what I did with them. So when they were eliminated, there were a couple of continental units that the British decided when the Americans had done 2 or 3 steps that they would focus on eliminating some units. They went on to the reinforcement track up there for returning in the spring when the continental units just come back. So defeating the units was, removing the units from the British perspective was to try to reduce the attacking factors, but ultimately we just needed to get some other guys moved around. It's kind of a weird situation, to be honest. We've been bashing our heads into Boston for a while, hoping to keep attriting the British. At any point, I could have opted for the British to actually just retreat and evacuate them to Halifax. But the longer I hold on to Boston, the less stuff the Americans can hold on to, or they don't get as many units. I don't think there's some units that would come in Boston, and we're depriving them of that. And I think we get units in here over time as the British. So certainly trying to hold on, but it's kind of a weird situation to be working with here. All right, let me run through the winter. Now, what the thing with winter is, again, generally speaking, leaders are not going to be activating very much at all. Very unlikely that leaders will activate. I'm trying to see, it's like all leaders on the north map are decreased by 2, and then all the movement costs are doubled. So there's a chance that the Americans may try some late winter offensive here in Canada, but I don't see that as necessarily being something that we can guarantee. I think I goofed up by not putting a British unit here, and I should have just been paying more attention to that. But oh well. Oh well. Okay, so I'll take care of this winter turn, and we'll see what else happens. Okay, here we are at the end of turn 5, and so this is basically the end of 1775, and we'll call this video here, and we'll save 1776 for the next video, even the winter turn, which won't be terribly exciting. Well, we basically, just to show these slips of paper aren't accurate, so don't look at the slips of paper, but we have now had our first big withdraw of units. We had some stacks that were withdrawn at the end of turn 5, in some cases substituted with a weaker unit of like remnant guys who stuck on. So the big stacks have been reduced a great deal. However, in the south, things remain stable. Basically, the British don't want to risk marching through the wilderness here due to this very good rifle unit. They're going to wait for the British fleet in 1776. So they're happy and content to sit here in St. Augustine while these other units in the south fail to activate and kind of sit around waiting for something to happen. Same thing with down here, though. We've got a lot of strength in Philadelphia. We probably want to move some stuff over to New York. And our northern sojourn was kind of interesting, actually. We decided to use that Canadian unit that we added here and had him attack Montreal, and we actually got rid of our first British step in a suicidal attack that killed the Canadian units. But Montreal is empty and still technically, in the control of Britain, or that's the way I interpret it. though Arnold's going to pop in there. But Arnold gets withdrawn at the end of next turn, so it's almost like it doesn't even matter. I'm not sure what to think about that. I'm still not sure what to think about this hex there. I think it's an odd situation, but because the British weren't occupying it, I decided that was good enough to bring the unit in. Everything else, Washington tried before the withdrawal to attack Boston some more, but he didn't really get anywhere with it. And everything else is kind of relatively stable now. I think the British are actually in an okay position to maybe try to break out of Boston, but it's really hard to say right now, whether or not that's a reasonable thing to try to do at this point. They're very weakened British units. They need to get some replenishments. And ultimately, we need to get into New York and be able to start getting the benefits of New York. So we need to try to get in there. I think we want to transfer some more units into New York. I'm keeping them out of the fortification because what I don't want to have happen is the British show up with their fleet in the next year, and then these guys are basically defeated in an amphibious invasion, and I lose a bunch of units there. I want them to at least be able to retreat. And if the British fail their naval invasion, then all the better. So yeah, there you go, guys. 1775, kind of a slow start. Nothing too crazy going on. I could have been pushing harder for Quebec, and I kind of took units there very late. I maybe should have thought about sending guys up there early in the turn, but I think both sides have made some mistakes. So me not sending something up towards Montreal sooner, the British for not putting these reinforcements directly in Boston at the beginning, and everything else is just kind of waiting to see what happens. Winter was kind of a big drag, obviously, and there wasn't much to do there. The next turn at the beginning of the next video will be winter as well. So yeah, there you go, guys. That's 1775 of the American Revolution scenario. Again, pretty quick playing because there's just not as much to do. I do think I need to take Washington around and pick up some of these other units to replenish the stack and continue to pressure Boston. But we'll see what happens. So we'll see you in the next video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you've got thoughts on the situation, let me know. And we'll go from there. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. See ya.